Before we dive into today's intense story, a quick reminder. Over 90% of our viewers watch our videos but aren't subscribed. If you enjoy content like this, take a second to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. And if you find this story gripping, don't forget to like the video. It really helps us out. My name is Claire, and I never imagined I would one day be sitting down to tell this kind of story. I used to believe in the kind of love that could weather any storm. I was the woman who organized birthday surprises months in advance, who knew every little habit of my husband and still found them endearing. Who felt lucky every time she said, "I do," even after years of marriage. But life has a way of shaking your beliefs when you least expect it. And what started as a picture-perfect life slowly became a series of quiet compromises and moments that chipped away at me piece by piece. Daniel and I met in college. He was the kind of guy who walked into a room and seemed to own the space without trying. He had this calm confidence and warmth that made everyone around him feel safe, especially me. We started as friends, just as students studying late in the library and trading ideas over coffee. But before long, we were inseparable. He made me feel seen, like I mattered in ways I hadn't even realized were important. We got married after graduation. Our wedding was small but beautiful. I wore my mother's veil, and Daniel's vows made everyone tear up, including my dad, who rarely showed emotion. For years, I thought we were happy. We built a life together in a quiet suburb. I taught art at a local high school, and Daniel worked in finance. Our days were simple, full of routines, morning coffee, shared dinners, Friday night movies. It wasn't flashy, but it was ours. At first, I'd barely noticed the changes. They came in small doses: a missed dinner here, a forgotten anniversary there. Daniel started coming home later than usual, brushing it off with vague mentions of deadlines and meetings. I wanted to believe him. I told myself all relationships go through seasons, that this was just a busy patch. I clung to the memories of the man I married and ignored the creeping sense of distance growing between us. One day, found myself sitting alone at our kitchen. Tabbouleh dinner I had prepared hours earlier, now cold, uneaten. I stared at my phone, willing it to light up with a message from him, some sign that he was thinking of me. But it stayed dark. That night, he came home after midnight. I asked if everything was okay, and he just nodded, exhausted. I didn't press him. I thought giving him space was the loving thing to do. It was around that time I met Evan. Evan wasn't anyone I was looking for. He was the new ceramics instructor at my school, brought in to cover a semester while our regular teacher recovered from surgery. He was quiet, soft-spoken, and kept to himself, but there was something about him that felt familiar. Not in the sense that I knew him, but in the way he noticed people. Like he actually listened. Our friendship started simply enough. He'd pop into my classroom during lunch breaks, admiring my students' work, asking questions about my methods. We'd talk about art, teaching, the frustrations of public education. He had this way of making me feel heard, like my opinions actually mattered. Not just to be polite, but because he valued them. For weeks, it was just innocent conversations and shared laughs in the break room. But the more time we spent together, the more I started to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Appreciated, valued, alive. Still, I didn't think I was doing anything wrong. I never hid our conversations from Daniel. Anything I mentioned Evan more often than I realized. Telling Daniel about our shared teaching struggles or a funny story from the day, he would nod, half listening, his eyes still on his phone. Then came the evening that changed everything. It was a Friday. I had stayed late at school to help organize an art showcase. Evan was there too, assisting with setting up the displays. We worked side by side for hours, and by the time we finished, the sky had turned a dusky purple. He offered to walk me to my car, and as we stood there under the parking lot lights, he said something I'll never forget. "You know, Claire, I think the world would be a lot better if more people had your kind of heart." I remember laughing nervously, brushing it off, but something inside me stirred. something that hadn't stirred in a long time. I felt seen again, in a way I hadn't felt since the early years with Daniel. That night, I went home and sat in my car longer than usual. Daniel was already asleep on the couch, the TV still glowing. I watched him for a while, wondering when the last time he'd looked at me like he used to, wondering if I was still the woman he once couldn't go a day without calling. I wish I could say that moment pushed me to confront things, to ask questions, to open up. But the truth is, I buried it. I went to bed and told myself not to read too much into things, but something had shifted. In the weeks that followed, Evan and I continued to grow closer. Still, no lines were crossed, at least not in the physical sense, but emotionally, I started to lean on him more than I should have. When Daniel forgot our date night, it was Evan who noticed I seemed off the next day. When my mother fell ill and I needed to leave early, Evan was the one who offered to cover my afternoon class. There was a moment, I still remember it clearly, when I looked at Evan and realized I was falling for him, not in a dramatic movie-like way, but in the quiet, terrifying way where you realize you've been building a connection brick by brick, and now you're standing in a room you didn't mean to construct. I tried pulling away. I told myself to stop spending time alone with him, to focus on my marriage. But the more I tried, the more I noticed how empty things had become at home. Daniel and I barely talked. When we did, it was about bills, the dog, things that needed fixing around the house. No laughter, no intimacy, just silence. One evening, I mustered the courage to ask Daniel if he was happy. He looked at me like I'd just asked him the weather. "Yeah, I guess," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Why?" "I don't know," I said quietly. "I just feel like something's changed between us." He shrugged. "Things are just busy. That's life, Claire." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. That was the end of the conversation. From that point on, I stopped trying to fix things. I told myself it was just a rough season, that maybe in a few months things would go back to normal, but deep down, I knew normal was gone. Evan never pushed. He never asked me to leave Daniel or confess my feelings, but he was there, constant, kind, understanding. And in those small moments, I began to build a life in my head that included him. It was innocent in the way daydreams are. But it was also dangerous, because it gave me something to hold on to when reality felt so cold. Then, something happened that forced everything into the light. One afternoon, I got a call from Daniel while I was at school. He never called during work hours, so I stepped outside to take it. "Claire," he said, his voice tight, "are you with him?" I froze. "What? You know who I'm talking about, Evan? Are you?" "With him?" I looked around, stunned. "No, I'm not. I'm at work." There was silence on the line. Then he said quietly, "I saw the messages." My heart dropped. I had forgotten to delete them. Not that they were scandalous. We never spoke inappropriately. But there were enough subtle undertones, enough late night, "thank you for being there" texts, that it was obvious something more existed between us than just a professional connection. I didn't know what to say. For the first time in our marriage, I had no words, only guilt and a deep, aching sadness. When I got home that night, Daniel was waiting for me in the living room. His expression wasn't angry. It was worse. It was hurt. "I didn't think I'd have to worry about you," he said. "Of all people, Claire?" I tried to explain. I told him nothing physical ever happened, that I didn't mean for any of it to go this far, that I had felt so alone, so unseen. "I was tired, Claire," he said. "I was trying to keep us afloat. I didn't realize I was losing you in the process." We talked for hours that night. For the first time in years, we were brutally honest with each other. And it hurt. It hurt more than I can describe. But it was also real. That was the beginning of a long, painful unraveling, a process that would test every part of who I was and force me to make decisions I never thought I'd have to make. I'll tell you the rest soon, but for now, that's how it all began. After that night, something shifted between Daniel and me, something fragile and unspoken. We didn't fall apart immediately. We didn't scream or slam doors or draw battle lines. Instead, we moved through the days like people tiptoeing across cracked ice. Careful, quiet, avoiding any sudden moves that might break through the surface. I stayed in the guest room for a while. It was Daniel's idea, though he didn't say it outright. He simply didn't suggest otherwise, and I didn't press. The silence between us grew heavier with every passing day. There were no fights, but there were no efforts to heal either. Just a quiet stalemate that neither of us knew how to escape. Evan didn't reach out, and I didn't expect him to. Word travels fast in schools, even when no one's saying anything outright. I knew he had probably sensed the shift. It's the way I kept my distance, avoided lingering conversations, and took my lunch elsewhere. He respected my space, but I felt the void more than I was willing to admit. I missed him. Not just the attention, or the comfort, but the way he made me feel like a person again. But I also knew that I had to face what was in front of me. My marriage wasn't dead, not yet. It was wounded, maybe beyond repair, but it deserved an honest attempt. We both did. Daniel. And I agreed to go to counseling. It was awkward at first. Sitting in a softly lit office across from a stranger who kept asking us questions neither of us wanted to answer. But over time, those sessions cracked something open. Not in a dramatic movie-ending way, but in small, subtle shifts. We started to talk again, not just about groceries and schedules, but about feelings, about resentment, about fear, about disappointment. I told him the truth about how I'd felt invisible, about how I had slowly become someone I didn't recognize. He told me how overwhelmed he'd been trying to provide, trying to meet expectations he thought I had, never realizing how much he had. Withdrawn. One day, in the middle of a session, Daniel turned to me and said, "I think we both stopped looking at each other." I nodded, tears in my eyes, because it was true. Somewhere along the line, we had stopped seeing each other. We became roles: husband, wife, provider, caretaker. Instead of two people in love, it would be easier if I could say that therapy fixed everything. That we walked out of there renewed and stronger. But that wasn't the case. It helped us understand the damage, but it didn't automatically undo it. The hardest part wasn't the anger. It was the grief. We grieved the marriage we thought we had. It's the version of us that had existed in better times. And as much as we tried, we couldn't recapture that version. It was like trying to squeeze back into a life that no longer fit. One evening, after months of therapy and quiet effort, Daniel sat me down at the kitchen table. His eyes were gentle, but there was a finality in them that I hadn't seen before. "I think we've done everything we could," he said softly. "But I don't think we're the same people anymore, and maybe that's okay." I didn't cry. I thought I would, but I didn't. Instead, I felt a strange sense of peace. He was right. We had done our best. And sometimes even love isn't enough to keep people together when they've grown too far apart. We separated quietly, no lawyers, no custody battles, just a mutual understanding that we deserved to find peace, even if it wasn't with each other. I moved into a small apartment not far from the school, and Daniel stayed in the house. We still talked occasionally, exchanging updates about the dog, about mutual friends, but it was different now, softer, without the weight of expectation. For a while, I focused on healing. I filled my days with work, with painting, with long walks through the park. I tried to rediscover who I was when I wasn't someone's wife or emotional support system. I reconnected with old friends, took a pottery class, even volunteered at a local gallery. And then out of nowhere, Evan emailed me. It wasn't dramatic or emotional. It's just a short message saying he hoped I was well and that he'd thought of me. When one of his students made a piece that reminded him of a project I'd once shared, I stared at the email for a long time before responding. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to avoid reopening wounds that had just started to heal. But another part of me, the part that had missed our conversations, our connection, couldn't resist. I wrote back. We exchanged a few messages, then a few more. And before long, we agreed to meet for coffee. Not as anything more than friends. At least, that's what we told ourselves. When I saw him again, something in me softened. He looked the same. Gentle eyes, calm presence. But there was a hesitation in him, too, a caution that mirrored my own. We talked for over an hour, catching up on life, on work, on everything that had happened since we last saw each other. There was no mention of what had passed between us. No rehashing of old emotions. Just two people reconnecting after time apart. Over the next few weeks, we met a few more times. Nothing rushed. Nothing with expectations. Just moments shared in the safety of familiarity. Eventually, he asked me, "Do you think you'd ever want to start again?" "Not with me," he added quickly. "Just in general. I've thought about it for a long moment." "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I think I'm finally open to the idea of being happy again." He smiled. And I realized that for the first time in a long time, I wasn't carrying the weight of guilt or sadness or confusion. I was simply present. It didn't mean I forgot what happened. It didn't erase the choices I made or the hurt I caused. But it meant I had grown. I'd learned. And maybe, just maybe, I was ready for something new. Whatever that looked like, what surprised me the most was that I didn't feel broken anymore. I didn't feel like someone defined by mistakes or betrayal. I felt like a woman who had faced something difficult and come out on the other side stronger. Daniel and I eventually finalized our divorce. We met once more before signing the papers. He looked at me and said, "I hope you find what you're looking for. I hope you do too," I said. There was no anger left between us, just respect and maybe even love. The kind that exists without possession or resentment. The kind that lets go. Evan and I didn't jump into anything right away. We remained friends, cautious, patient. But over time, something deeper began to blossom between us. Not because we needed each other, but because we wanted to know who we could be together without the shadows of the past hanging over us. That journey wasn't easy either. There were still questions, still moments of doubt. But it was honest, and that made all the difference. I'll tell you how it all came full circle in the last part. But what I can say now is this. Sometimes life doesn't follow the path you thought it would. Sometimes it takes detours, heartbreaks, and hard truths to find clarity. But in those detours, you often find the version of yourself you were always meant to become. Time moved quietly. After that, Evan and I didn't rush anything. We had both learned the value of patience and honesty. We spent time together without pressure, just enjoying the simplicity of shared walks. Quiet dinners and long conversations that felt like balm to the wounds we had carried. One afternoon, months later, we sat by the lake near my apartment, the autumn breeze weaving through the trees. He turned to me and said, "Do you ever regret anything?" I looked out over the water, thinking carefully. I regret the hurt I caused. I regret not speaking up sooner in my marriage, not fighting for myself when things began to fade. But I don't regret learning who I am now. Without all of it, the pain, the mistakes, I wouldn't have reached this place. He nodded. I get that. We sat in silence for a while, the comfortable kind that doesn't beg to be filled. I reached for his hand, and he didn't pull away. I wasn't searching for a perfect ending anymore. I knew love wasn't a grand rescue or a flawless story. It was quiet, understanding. It was showing up day after day with honesty and grace. Daniel eventually found someone new. He sent me a message once thanking me for the way we handled everything. I told him I was happy for him, and I meant it. As for me, I didn't need a label or a finish line. Needed peace. And I finally had it. Life isn't always about right or wrong. Sometimes it's about growth. And in that growth, I found freedom, not just from my past, but from the version of myself that had forgotten how to hope. I'm not the same woman I was, and I'm thankful for that.